does that lead into one of your personal mottos, Ryan, of living as if, which is a very powerful motto to live by? Can you share with us that? Because I think that's
Yeah.
just beautiful. I call it act as if, which I borrowed from Abraham Hicks. But
Yes.
I think it's the same idea.
Yeah. And, this brings up a really funny thing too. When I like have downloads of something that pops in, like the living as if, I realized that I'm like, oh, I didn't invent this. I probably just picked it up from someone else's server, And so with this as if, it was something that I got during a plant medicine journey where, I was taking myself way too seriously. And so I was judging myself on like, okay, I want to be someone, I'm just going to throw out a random example. I want to be someone who is doing, let's say, 4 podcasts a week, right? And so, if that was my goal, then if I didn't do it, I was judging myself, right? And so what I started realizing was, well, it's not really putting the 4 podcasts on the calendar that makes me able to do 4 podcasts. It's getting into the identity of someone who's really excited to do 4
Oh,
podcasts every week, because then not only will I have this, like the masculine energy to go out and make sure I get guests on, but I believe that more guests will start coming to me and being like, hey, I want to do more podcasting. And so, and
yeah.
coincidentally, that's exactly what I found out. But what I started realizing was, well, what if I just started like, because at that point, say we're on chapter 1, right? Of like, okay, I have this goal and we think it's the goal, but really it's who we're going to become that allows us to reach that goal, right? It's the next version of ourselves, changing our personality. And so living as if is thinking, okay, well, if I were someone who did 4 podcasts per week, what would my life look like? What time would I get up? Right. What days would I do podcasts on? Would I have set days? Would I just have a calendar that people can book in? And so you actually start thinking about it, and then you get to choose what your intuition is telling you. So maybe it's like, oh, I'm going to get up an hour earlier and spend an hour doing networking every day. And now that's attached, that activity you're doing is attached directly to the version of you're becoming to get to that goal. And so I think what a lot of people do is they skip that intermediary step where they go from the version they are now to making this goal, but they don't think about who they must become to be able to reach that goal. And so that process is what I call living as if, right? So you start trying on. It's like you're going to a dressing room and you're trying new things on. You're going, how does this fit? Do I like that? Oh, do I like this? And so if you follow the fun, right, and you follow your intuition, eventually that as if is going to become a matter of fact, where then you're waking up an hour early every day, you're networking, you're having a blast, and all of a sudden you realize one day, oh shit, it's matter of fact now. Now I don't need to live as if anymore. Now I can figure out, do I have a new goal that I'm looking to bring in, or am I content where I'm at? And if so, that whole process starts over again. And so as I did that, I took a lot of pressure off myself. I stopped taking myself so seriously. I was able to enjoy the journey of life more. And with the clients I work with, it's been huge because, the journey of life is not linear. And so, and we know that about time as well, it's not linear. And so when we're becoming a new version of ourselves, a lot of times it's what we think it's what we have to become versus what we get to become and what we're excited to become. And that brings up faith again, right? In this whole feminine energy of realizing that your logical mind is great for a lot of things, telling time, allowing you to get from point A to point B in a car, but it's probably not the best thing for figuring out exactly how you're going to become the version of yourself that's going to be able to, say in this, example, do 4 podcasts per week. It can set a goal, right? Of like, I want to do 4 podcasts a week. And then it can provide a little bit of structure to say, okay, what would I need to do? What's my first step, I think, right? But then leave yourself open to intuition and the more feminine energy coming through, the more right brain approach, where all of a sudden, maybe, in this example of wanting to do 4 podcasts per week, someone hits you up and they're like, hey, I'd really love, I have this podcast I'd love for you to be a recurring guest on, right? And so now you're like, oh, cool. So now I have 1 podcast every week I'm doing. I thought I'd have to reach out to 4 people every week, and now I'm going on one. So maybe these 4 podcasts I'm doing don't only have to be ones that I'm recording on my podcast. Maybe it could be 2 on mine and 2 on someone else's per week. Oh, that sounds fun. And so now you start allowing that feminine energy to give you a little bit more breadcrumbs of what is actually going to make you happy in this goal of, doing 4 podcasts per week, for example. And so it's fascinating, and living as if has just really allowed me to be on what I call vacation vibration through my journey of life, where I'm not taking myself too seriously. I know, simply like very similar to how the lion sleeps 20 hours a day because he knows he can get the kill in 4 hours. It's very similar. Now I know, like, okay, my on times per day are like 9 through 3 where I can really like go at it and really put that masculine structure into play and get that energy going. And then after that, I'm going to like settle my snow globe and actually think about like, okay, what did I think about today? What do I have to figure out tomorrow? It's very similar to, I think I said in the first part, the race car, right? You tune this race car and you spend all this money on it, and then you go race it in a quarter mile, and then you go back to the garage for the next 2 months and you tweak it and you figure things out, right? And so that's how I split up my day, and it's all based on as if, right? Because if I'm living as if, well, there's room to change. If I have to become this particular thing, then it's static. There's no room for change in that. So if I don't end up liking it, it's still what I have to do, right? But if I am curious about what I'm excited to do, then I try something out, experiment, I go back to the drawing board, I go, how did that work? I like that, or I didn't like that, and then I go forward in the next day. And when you do it that way, life, in my experience, becomes much more enjoyable.
Wow, that's just so wise and brilliant, Ryan, because like a universal problem people have is energy management, and which leads to burnout. And I know that all too well myself.
Same.
Just being, as Michaela Boehm, one of my mentors, says, too much go and not enough flow. But my challenge, Ryan, and I'd like to know what you would recommend is, I'm blessed to now be doing really something I love to do. Now, don't get me wrong, it's still a crap load of work, as you know, and a big responsibility and all that stuff. Yeah. But I have been in holistic health and wellness for virtually all of my adult life. So the boundaries are blurry between my hobby, my passion, my interest, and living. Like, I have to eat well, I have to move my body, I have to drink clean. Otherwise I have no energy, and I'm not very smart. Like, my brain doesn't work right, and I just not motivated. So it's all jumbled together, the work-life balance, if you will. And I have struggled, and I'll just admit to everyone that it's been hard for me to have really good boundaries between my work and my quote unquote personal life. Like, there kind of isn't one, because it all spills together. And when do you turn it off? And like we mentioned at the beginning of the show, you and I share, among many, many things, that we're both avid learners. Like, when do I turn it off? Like, stop, just walk in nature without a stupid audiobook educating you and preparing for the next guest. Like, can you help us, people like me that still don't have that dialed in yet? You mentioned 9 to 3 is kind of your peak productivity time, which is beautiful. How do you, Ryan, actually stop at 3 or whatever? How do you do that?
Yeah. And, the first thing I'll say is, my lines are a little blurry at this point in my life as well, because I truly do love everything I do. And it does spill over. Like, work and pleasure are the same, business and pleasure are the same things for me. And what an amazing point to get to in life. Yet at the same time, more of my challenge, and I imagine anyone listening, including yourself, that is doing what they love will understand what I mean, that we always talk about, in society, especially as coaches, right? We talk about, helping people that, are they have no off switch because they're doing something they don't like, and they're driving to a job they don't like, and all these things, right? But what about the flip side? What about the person that's loving what they do so much that they are unable to turn off, right? It's almost like, I forget if I mentioned this in the first part too, but it's almost like a functioning alcoholic versus a fall down alcoholic, right? The fall down alcoholic is the person who's doing what they don't love. They're stressed out, right? It's much easier to tell them like, hey, you're not enjoying life. And they're like, yeah, I know, right? Like, you need to turn off. Yeah, I know, right? But people like you and I, we're like the functional alcoholic, where we go to our job, we do our thing. No one would even know that we're an alcoholic if they didn't actually know it. And so for us, it's like someone says, hey, you need to turn off. And you're like, but I love everything, right? And so one of the ways I know, and this is really funny as I think about it, because it's something my parents taught me when I was young, is that I've always been someone who finds fun. And so I would be staying up late as a young kid, and they would go, hey, your cheeks are red, you need to go to bed. And I'd be like, no, right? And so one of the ways I tell is from the heat flush in my face. So if I'm feeling like, usually around 3 or 4, I start getting that flush in my face. Now, it doesn't mean that I always stop right there, right? Because I still like to touch the hot stove sometimes, and I'm definitely guilty of it too. And for everyone listening, all the stuff I've talked about today, I've figured out, or, quote unquote, believe, because I've experienced the other side of it, right? And that's why I'm able to speak to these things, because I've gone through them and continue to go through them. And so what I've realized is that, when it comes to boundaries, they're important. And I do feel that when you're doing what you love and you're beginning, like right now, it's Alex and I that are handling everything in the business. And it's a lot, right? Like, sales, marketing, taxes, legal stuff. I mean, it's a lot, right? And so, the deal that Alex and I made specifically around work was like, okay, we want to be done by the certain time, unless, and I'll explain why I'm doing this, but like, we want to be done by this certain time, say 3-4 for me. For him, it'd be right around 3 or 4. Also, he's on Pacific time, I'm on Eastern, but I want to be done around 3 or 4. And then from there, I have hobbies that I want to go into and do. And so I have many different hobbies, and the way in which I choose, like, so after 3 or 4, I let myself flow. And that way I can get a couple more hours out of, like, quote unquote, my development, my learning, etc. But I only go to what I'm feeling. So maybe some nights it's at like 3 or 4. I just hop on Gaia and I just want to lay in bed and watch a couple, shows on there and just spark curiosity. Maybe I have a little more energy one night. I want to go take a walk. Maybe I want to play with the stick mobility sticks, these gigantic orange sticks that I love. Maybe I want to play guitar, right? And so that's been kind of the way that I've been able to work around boundaries between work and pleasure. It's like, okay, so technically if I'm learning new things on guitar, that could still be considered quote unquote work. And I do musical therapy in my business. And so it could be considered that, but as long as it's fun for me, I'm not considering it work. And to be fair, nothing that I do is unfun to me. I mean, even doing taxes was enjoyable on a level where I was like, I'm getting to learn how to do this. Like, I've never been able to do this for a business before my first year, right? And so,
all right, you lost me now.
Yeah, exactly. Trust me when I say
you had me up
like, he wasn't
until
that happy about it, But yeah, but like, here, this brings up a good point where what I tell people is, when you're doing what you love, the argument for really being as healthy and optimized as possible is that there will be times that when you're starting your own business, you have to redline a little bit, right? You have to stay up a little later. You have to kind of go past a little bit of your boundaries. And I've realized that it's a fine line you walk, right? Because again, us workaholics and us, like, people that love what we're doing, it can easily become a cyclical thing where we're doing it every day and then we're redlining too long. And again, to use the analogy of the race car, no matter how amazing your race car is, how much money you put in it, you don't redline it constantly, right? You might get there, but then you let off the gas. And so, like, just like in a NASCAR race, there's straightaways and then there's turns, right? Where people are, not redlining as much. And so what I always say is, like, right now, for instance, I'm gearing up for a big podcasting week down in Austin in May. And so with that week, I know, like, okay, I'm going to redline a little bit for the next couple of weeks to get all these big projects done before that. And then I have a week before I go there that is going to be a yin-centered week. And I understand that because I know from experience that if I don't have that week to decompress after, I'm not going to be able to actually show up for the big thing that I have to do in Austin. And so it's this fine line where, as you start getting to know yourself more and you start gaining more awareness, you start realizing, like, what are the signs that I'm redlining? And then what are the signs that I'm redlining too much, right? And so for anyone listening, these are things that are different for everyone. For me, it's like the cheek flush is when I notice, like, okay, I'm getting a little tired, right? Like, how much energy do I have left? Do I have the energy to play guitar? Do I have the energy to watch TV? Do I have the energy to just meditate? Some days it's just meditating. Do I have the energy to read a book, right? With no external, like, energy coming in from a TV or a cell phone or whatever. But at the same time, I know there'll be certain times that cheek flush happens and I go, yeah, I'm going to push through a couple more hours and get this done, because I know how good I'll feel tomorrow and I'll be able to take a relaxing break tomorrow. And so it's a fine line that I walk. And with most people that I coach on things like this, I tell them that really, like, this is discovering your own race car, right? You might realize that, like, hey, if I redline, around, if I try to redline around corners, then I hit the wall, right? And so they'll realize that there are these times where, like, okay, is it the weekend? Is it a Saturday? Do I not really have anything to do and I could relax, but I just want to clean the house and then, go shopping and do all these things today, even though I have tomorrow to do it? Those are times that you're really going to be able to tune in and go, nope, today is the day I relax. Nothing needs to get done, right? Because again, in business, there are things that just, like, have to get done, right? And so, there are times where, like, I ask myself, does this have to get done? Is this really, like, a necessity that I get this done right now? And sometimes the answer is yes. And when it's yes, I power through it. And then I make sure that I'm supplementing the right way, eating, sleeping extra that night, doing things that I know from personal experience will allow me to continue the next day without feeling burned out. And so for everyone, it's a little different. But what I would say is just start to become aware of how you're feeling at, say, the end of your day. I mean, like, at the beginning of your day, midway through, the end of your day, with your hobbies, And then start to ask yourself, does this have to be done? Or is it just something that I'm telling myself has to get done because maybe I'm addicted to doing? And some sense of me does feel, it will feel good, like almost like an addiction, right? Like it'll feel good when you do it, but you're going to regret it after because you're going to know that you stepped on your values. And so if it feels like something that's going to step on your values of, say for me is like liberation, faith, and trust, like those values for me, when I'm looking at like overworking or doing something like that, it's like, okay, am I stepping on my values? No, this is something that needs to get done. And like, I have a due date tomorrow and I want to be able to sleep tonight and not wake up super early in these things. Okay, cool. I'll get it done. But on the other hand, if it's like a Saturday and I'm like, no, I don't need to get this done until next Friday, this could wait. Then I know like, okay, then you need to take the break today, and so that's how I do it in my life.